We'll be going at the moment through voices from both Kiev as well as from Moscow at the moment. I'm joined by Maria Mesentseva, Ukrainian MP. Alexander Bretetsky, Russian journalist, will join us from Kremlin in Moscow in a short while from now. But first to you, Maria, your reactions to what you've seen today and what is the Ukrainian perspective? Do you see this as a full-scale invasion? What happens next?
Well, this is a very interesting setup, being followed by a journalist from Kremlin. I wonder what he might be saying. But it's a brutal and violent war, which started back in 2014 after the Revolution of Dignity and continued today with a full-scale invasion of further than the temporary occupied territories in the east of Donetsk and Lugansk regions and the peninsula of Crimea on the south, where at these 3 points, I would say, including Kiev, the highest tensions are ongoing. I am currently in Kiev. I was awakened by a sound of a missile at 5:05 local Kiev time, same as all of my colleagues and people in Kharkiv, in the second largest city of Ukraine, where I am coming from. Now I know that the people of Kharkiv are mostly in their basements, in their missile evacuation underground places, everywhere underground where they can be safe. Also, Metropolitan, the underground is stopped in operation for the purpose to receive the citizens of Kharkiv. In Kiev, we have also such situation that, it's been announced an hour ago that the missile shooting will continue. There, people were seen in Kharkiv and in the closest.
But can I ask you, Maria, what happens now? Do you fear when Vladimir Putin says he wants to demilitarize Ukraine? Do you see him pushing for a regime? Does he want to change the government?
Is lying since the 90s. He was lying when he invaded Moldova. He was lying when he invaded Georgia. Now he's lying when he invaded Ukraine. We don't need to be demilitarized. We are a free country of a free choice with an army which was at a zero level back in 2014 because it was full of Russian generals before, because of the influence of Russia. We don't deny it, but we regret it. And now we have a strong army which stands up for our country in every region, from the north to south and from the east to the west. And whatever Putin might be saying or whatever his puppet politicians might be saying, there will all be sanctioned. And I hope the world will definitely turn back. I know that, for instance, such organizations which are working on human rights, which are breached by Putin every other minute, like Council of Europe, I joined the conversation 2 hours ago, and 47 member states together with Russia, but 46 member states would raise an issue of getting Russia out of this institution because an aggressor cannot be a part of it. But therefore, I would like to say that further sanctions, which we're expecting, today from the U.S., which have to target the main economic varieties like.
But are you ready Are you ready, Maria, do you believe that this will become a full-scale escalated conflict that will last several days? Is Ukraine ready for a full-scale conflict?
It's not please don't call it a conflict. It is a war.
Yes,
you can call it a third world war. You can call it whatever. Please don't call it a conflict. Ukrainians don't have a conflict. We don't have a conflict with each other. We were attacked and we are withstanding a Russian aggression chaired by Mr. Putin. He got really mad because he was thinking, okay, I will invade Kiev easily. I will invade Kharkiv easily. Do you remember the sounds in Mariupol? This sound was heard across the whole country at 5 a.m. Now, I would like to say that we withstood the aggression in the south and in the east. There are numerous losses of Russian army. These people are a regular army of Russia marked on their hand with a red stripe. A red stripe which indicates them. So when they're trying to wear not a military uniform but a civilian one, they're still wearing the stripe to be identified. Plus, we have numerous fake news. Like, for instance, a couple of hours ago, a journalist asked me, Maria, are you being evacuated from the parliament, from the House of Parliament? I said, no, we are in different regions of Kiev. Everyone is staying in Kiev because we have to pass the laws, and we are at the state of martial law. It's a state of highest emergency and alarm. That's why it's a fake news. Another fake was that, you know, Kiev was surrounded in a circle. Now there is another danger. You know that the tragedy of Chernobyl, which is up in the north from Kiev, which happened back in 1986. There are Russian tanks right now, and there's a big fight. Another point of concern is the airport next to Kiev.
But are you worried? Are you worried that he will take it over? No, are you worried that Mr. Putin wants to basically effect a regime change? He wants his own puppet regime in place in Kiev. And that
I can confirm that. I can confirm that. He is very upset that he didn't do a blitzkrieg because he's not a Putin, he's a Putler. He is a Hitler of 21st century. And because we withstand, it might last for another 2-3 days. We hope not longer than that.
So 2-3 days, but are you worried that you will... No, will you all be able to combat the Russian army? Will you be able to combat? Will you be able to combat the might of the Russian army for 2 to 3 days?
We have been able to combat it for 8 years. We will stand by our army, and we will continue doing that. He will not receive a tasty victory in Ukraine.
Okay. Those are very strong words. You're saying that there will be he will not get a victory that he wants in Ukraine. Ukraine will resist it. And you believe that Ukraine is in a position to resist this Russian aggression. One final word. What does Ukraine expect the world to do beyond sanctions?
Well, we are trying to find further solutions with humanitarian aid. It's been already on the way from the EU countries. We definitely know that because it's approaching the border. The Cabinet of Ministers will pass a special law so that for instance, medication, a special oil and gas, other things which are needed for infrastructure and the normal functioning of our cities will pass the customs control easier. And we, of course, hope that the sanctions will target very concrete, high-ranking economic sections for Russia, like oil and gas extraction, like high technologies for their army. We saw the bank which was dealing with army directly, and all the transactions were coming through it. It was targeted with its daughter companies. So we have a list of sanctions we have proposed to US in a common joint document with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I think they have to be considered. From the EU, we wait for another response shortly tomorrow, where the consultations will take him on 27 member states. And all this has to stop him. If not, that would be really bad for the whole continent of Europe and for our world in general.
You're expecting many more sanctions. You're expecting the noose, in a way, to be tightened on Russia when it comes to sanctions. Maria, thanks very much for joining us. Stay safe, and appreciate your joining us in this difficult time there from Kiev. This is an invasion. This is war, as Maria describes it there. Now, we've got Rajesh Pawar joining us from Mariupol, which, remember, is where the first missile attacks took place. Rajesh, give us a sense of what the situation now is. In the morning, there were those missile bombs that were thrown in and around Mariupol. What's happening at the moment where you are?
Rajdeep, in the morning, there was strike at the Mariupol airport, and what I know, it is out of function now. It's out of operation right now. There was some shots fired in the afternoon as well, which I believe were a counterattack from the Ukrainian army. They were RT shell firing in the afternoon, and since then it has been quiet. The streets are totally deserted. There are hardly any people in the street. Near the center of the city, no people around here. Only place where you see people here is outside the ATMs trying to withdraw money from the banks. Rajdeep.
Rajesh, appreciate your joining me with that update from Mariupol at the moment. Let me go to Alexander Brzezinski. He's joining me from Moscow at the moment. Appreciate your joining us, Alexander. You might have heard what the Ukrainian MP told us just now. This is a full-scale war. This is Vladimir Putin as a modern-day Hitler, according to her, launching a third world war. How is this being perceived in Russia? How do Russians see Vladimir Putin's action? Do they support it, or do they believe that this is a case of misadventurism?
Well, first of all, the Russian public is heavily divided, and you see there in the internet, on Facebook, people really fighting with each other. Some supporting actions by President Putin, stating that that's retaliation for Donbass people who have been suffered because of the Ukrainian invasion before. So that's actually happened. But some people do actually
support. Some people support the Ukraine and actually the Putin flags of Ukraine there on the avatar. So that's the case. That's the war going on in the Russian internet, and that's a very serious war.
For some people, actually, the actions of President Putin are seen as a complete invasion, and some comparing as this invasion as the situation is in Yugoslavia, as the United States attacked this country in 1991. So Yugoslavia is now Ukraine, Russia is the United States as an aggressive country, and also people whom I spoke to, some people in Donbass, are actually also hiding and feeling that they are being bombed by the Ukrainians, although people in Russia feel we are very sorry for this war and for our president, who is seen sometimes as pretty radical person who is...
Why do you think it's been done? Is it to build strategic depth, that the fear that Ukraine could be within the Western NATO umbrella that provoked? What is it that provoked Vladimir Putin to do this? Your sense, why has he done this at this particular time?
Well, Mr. Putin had legitimate concerns over Russian security. That was the reason. He had those concerns. However, but unfortunately, he was waiting for too long, and people actually thought, if he will retaliate, maybe in a diplomatic way, maybe just recognition of the republics. But what the most interesting thing is, even those people who have recognized the republics, who have supported this move, were actually now sort of against the war. And Mr. Putin said, and I quote him, that he wants to take off the Nazi people from Kiev. Right. And I think that's a very heavy term. Where the Nazi? Is Mr. Zelensky a Nazi, or his surroundings? So that's a very complicated story.
Can I one more question? Do you believe that Putin and the Russian army want a long-scale war, or are they hoping for a swift operation? And what is their end game? What do they want to achieve?
They, of course, are hoping for the swift operation, and that's why they target exactly the installations like the Americans did in Yugoslavia. But the war can actually go out of control, because the Ukrainians would definitely fight, and that's going to be, they might actually turn into full-scale war.
Right. So the danger is of this turning into a full-scale war, not just a limited conflict, is what you're suggesting there. Mr. Brzezinski, I appreciate you joining us from Moscow at a time like this, which is, I know, tough for all of you covering the conflict there. Appreciate your joining us. Let's widen it. Let's also look at views coming in from India. VB Soni, former diplomat to Ukraine, is with us. PS Raghavan, also former diplomat to Russia. Ian Bond is a former British diplomat, joins us from London. Einar Tangen is political and economic affairs commentator in Beijing, and Dr. Daniel Hamilton is fellow at Brookings Institution in Washington. Let's get all your reactions first. Let's get a quick Indian perspective first. Mr. Raghavan, you've been a former ambassador to Russia. Are you surprised, or do you believe this was expected?
Well, I can't say it was expected, but I can't say I was very surprised either. You know, this is something that's been going on for quite a while. The troop build-up on the border for at least 3 months now, 4 months now. And it's in the backdrop to it are the negotiations that have been going on between Russia and the West on what Russia has been calling its legitimate security concerns and its security guarantees that it wanted. And you know, this is a dialogue that has been going on, and even behind this harsh rhetoric of this threatened sanctions, the West has been telling Russia that we will meet you halfway on your various concerns. I think where it sprang a leak was in one of the three demands that Russia made, which is the settlement of the Ukraine impasse, the implementation of the Minsk agreements, which would settle the special status of the Donbas region. Now, Russia felt that the United States had actually sort of assured it that this would be done. There had been a number of visits of U.S. Officials and so on. Now, suddenly it appeared that this was not a done deal and it was not going to happen. And there, I think Mr. Putin decided that the West, therefore, cannot be depended upon to deliver what it had promised, and decided to take the law into his own hands. Because Ukraine Ukraine is a very important security concern for Russia. I mean, people say that he's very emotional about Ukraine and so on. I think leaders don't act on emotion. They act on very hard-headed security concerns. So it's a security concern that he has acted on.
Okay, you're saying that this is he sees this Ukraine as providing, some would say, strategic depth versus the West. He cannot afford to have Ukraine within a Western umbrella, possibly under NATO. We'll come back to you, Mr. Raghavan, to look at India's response in a moment. But Ian Bond, former British diplomat, joins us from London. You've got Boris Johnson, Mr. Bond, today saying that Putin is a modern-day dictator. But the fact is the West at the moment seems in no position really to rein in the dictator. They knew this was coming, but couldn't do anything about it.
Well, they could have done much more about it. And one of the problems and one of the reasons that we're in this position is that the West has consistently refused to believe Putin when he has told us what he was going to do. Last summer, he wrote a 5,000-word essay explaining why he didn't think that the state of Ukraine had any right to exist. And everybody said, well, you know, Putin has been in isolation because of COVID. His hobby is history. This is just, you know, it's just his latest production of his hobby. Well, I think Putin said what he meant, and now he's carrying it out. And I'm afraid that, although I agreed with much that your former ambassador said, I didn't agree with him that Putin is not acting on emotion. Anyone who saw the speeches that he has made this week can see that actually he's acting on a lot of emotion. There is a lot of hatred towards the West, and there is a lot of delusion about the kind of country that Ukraine is.
So let me take that also to Dr. Daniel Hamilton, fellow at Brookings Institution in Washington. Do you believe the West could have done more, as Mr. Bond is suggesting? It appears that Joe Biden post-Afghanistan, US withdrawing from there, the sense is America is weak, the leadership is weak, and Vladimir Putin in a game of chess seems to, for now at least, have almost checkmated the West, gone into Ukraine with very little resistance from the Western world.
As I agree with Ian that there are a number of things the West could have done before, but now here we are. So this is not a limited conflict, as I heard you or one of your guests say. This is a war. This is an unprovoked war of aggression against a country, using military force to invade a country, alter its borders, and subsume it within the Russian sphere, either as part of Russia, potentially, or as a compliant puppet regime, as it had been the case earlier in this century. We have to be very clear about the consequences here. This is not also just about Ukraine, however horrific this is going to be. You have a major power in the world challenging basic precepts of international order, challenging the existing post-Cold War security order in Europe, with many precedents for other parts of the world in terms of using so-called separatist regions as a pretext for invasion, changing borders by force, unleashing cyber attacks in neighboring countries with no reason, a whole set of other issues that will ripple around the world. Ukraine is the epicenter, but it's going to be far worse. And we need to brace for that, because this is just the beginning of something, a very different era. We're entering a whole new era here. It's not just about a localized conflict in part of Europe.
You're suggesting that similar conflicts could erupt in other parts of the world. There seems to be a vacuum in terms of the fact that America seems to, would I be right in saying, Dr. Hamilton, abandoned its role of playing this sort of global policeman, that America is inward looking, doesn't want to get into a situation where they have to put military personnel on the ground. Am I correct?
No, I don't believe that's true. We have military forces all around the world still. What you're seeing is a debate in the United States about the trade-offs between certain regions trying to prioritize limited resources. The United States, the debate in the United States is how playing that outsized role over the last few decades has sort of constrained our own possibilities at home. But that doesn't mean stepping back. It means being more selective, and also looking to other countries to pick up the burden. Why is it that one country, the United States, is seen by others as having to do all the work? The U.S. is looking to countries like India and others to share burdens about upholding this order from which we can all profit.
Let me take that to Mr. Soni and to my Chinese guest who's joining me from Beijing. But first to you, Mr. Soni, former diplomat to Ukraine. What are India's realistic options? There's talk that Prime Minister Modi may speak to President Putin, but really, does India have any role to play at all? Or is it best for India to stay out and just watch what's going on?
No, I think what one has to do is we have strategic interests in both the countries from different angles. I mean, I don't want to talk about Russia because that has been a story which is known to everybody. But the latest country to have entered in that is Ukraine. Ukraine is providing a lot of opportunities for getting our defense supplies also.
Mr. Soni, I'm just stopping you for a moment because the MEA is having an official briefing. I'll come back to my guest in a moment. Just let's listen in.
The emerging situation in Ukraine, including the contingencies that could arise, and I'm referring to the situation as we see today. We started the registration of Indian nationals in the Ukraine about a month ago. Our embassy anticipated the need to connect and be in contact with all Indian students in the Ukraine. Based on the online registration process that was conducted by our embassy, we found that there were close to about 20,000 Indian nationals, including students in the Ukraine. Of these, about 4,000 have since left the country. We have taken a number of measures to facilitate flights out of the country. This includes removing the cap on the number of passengers that could fly out of Ukraine that was imposed by the civil aviation authorities of both countries. There was a 440 numbers that could fly out every week. That cap was removed. We also ensured that the number of flights were augmented rapidly from about twice a week to about 2 flights a day. And that enabled us to get at least 4,000 of our citizens and students out. We should also remember that there were a number of other options available through flights to Dubai and Istanbul and other places from Kyiv. Our embassy in Ukraine continues to be functional, is rendering all assistance possible to Indian nationals there, notwithstanding the fairly complicated and evolving situation that we find ourselves in. The embassy has issued a number of advisories in recent days. Today itself, the embassy has issued 3 advisories, and these provide advice to Indian nationals on the situation as it evolves, travel towards safer places, including western parts of the country that will facilitate the exit by road and other means, safety precautions that our citizens could take, etc.
Okay, so India planning an evacuation plan. Sorry, Mr. Soni, I interrupted you. Your sense, is that all that India really can do at the moment? Ensure first the safety of its nationals. Beyond that, as was suggested just now by our guest from America, countries like India need to put greater pressure on Russia. Can we really? Do we have any leverage?
In my opinion, not all that much. Russia is independently developing relations with some countries like the Pakistan. You must have heard about the President Imran Khan, Prime Minister Imran Khan going there and had to come back. So in terms of supplies to Pakistan, I remember when I was there in about 20 odd years back, they had supplied T-2080, tanks, the main battle tank T-80UD, worth $600 billion. That was the one issue. Then also we had some problem in Ukraine in terms of nuclear testing. In fact, Ukraine was the only country, one of the few countries which condemned our nuclear testing in 1998. So for a moment, our relations went into hibernation, you can call it. But we developed trade relations. We developed students, of course, are there going there. Our export of items like pharmaceuticals, they shot up like anything. We are also importing quite a lot of interesting items from there. So we have, of course, I must also tell you the Antonov refitting. I mean, a lot of our aircraft would come, at least during those times, they would fly all the way from India for refitting and upgradation, etc. So those were very important issues. And it is important that we cannot just ignore all those things. And we had an alternative supply which was available from Ukraine. Whereas if we were to take a stand, we'll be caught in a situation where we will not be able to face each other. So we have to be a balanced side in terms of what is happening there. First of all, important thing is to diffuse the situation. There is the security of the Indian nationals. Also, what I do find strange is that Europe knew about the situation as it was deteriorating with each passing day. But what action did they take? Was there any concerted action? I'm sorry to say, I didn't see any evidence of that. People are talking about sanctions now. There will be increased sanctions. What will it amount to? Russia can probably bear it. But more importantly, it will push them to China, because China would be quite keen.
That's a good point to take to Einar Tangen, who's joining us from Beijing, and I know it's late there. Mr. Tangen, the Chinese seem to be virtually endorsing what Vladimir Putin has done, suggesting that there were security reasons why he's done it. Is that the general sense that you get, that China intends to back Russia in its invasion of Ukraine?
No, that's not the general sense. What China's position is that this is like when the saying goes, when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. In this particular case, the grass is Ukraine. This is a geopolitical contest between Russia and the United States and its allies over NATO expanding into the previous Soviet bloc. And that, unfortunately, it's, as I said, the Ukrainian people are suffering. So China understands that, but they do not endorse any kind of intervention within a country. That is a longstanding principle that Beijing has stuck to. It's one of the things that they repeat time after time when there are questions about internal policies. So that's not the issue. But you know, I don't think everyone here in Beijing, I think, is well aware that this is an armed incursion. And that Putin has basically said he's given up on getting security assurances satisfactory to him that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. And he's, in essence, looking to create a buffer country. Looks like a partition, an eastern and western Ukraine.
But is Russia going to support Russia? But is China
River as the boundary?
But Mr. Tangen, is China going to support Russia in the United Nations Security Council? Is China going to support the Russians globally? Are we seeing, as has been suggested, China using this to even get closer to Russia?
No, I don't think it's a question of trying to get closer to Russia. Russia has really no other place to go. They've played their card. Obviously, the U.S. and Europe are not going to be too friendly from now on. And Russia is going to have to turn a lot of its sales, of its energy, back toward the east, not necessarily all China. Obviously, Korea, Japan, there are already other markets that are out there. But, at this juncture, China is in a situation where this is very unsettling. China has been trying to promote trade agreements, RCEP, Belt and Road, even joining the CPTPP. And they were hoping for trade. They're concerned about a global recession. This kind of conflict is sure to push the world into a very deep recession. This is not going to be a short-lived event. And it's going to have massive economic repercussions, not only for China, but also the developing world.
Let me take that to you, Mr. Bond. Do you see this as Mr. Tangian suggests, some kind of an escalating conflict that will be prolonged? Or do you go by the view that this is going to be a short and swift operation? That's what Vladimir Putin is banking on.
Well, it's clearly what he's hoping for. But no, I tend to agree that this could be quite prolonged. Not just because the Ukrainian army is a lot better than it was in 2014 when the Russians really faced almost no opposition, but because Putin has actually consolidated Ukraine as a country over the last 8 years. There's a popular misconception in many places that Ukraine is somehow a deeply divided country with a Russian-speaking East that would rather be with Moscow and a Ukrainian-speaking West that would rather be with the West. But actually, opinion polling has shown that across the whole country, people want to be part of Western institutions. They don't want to be drawn back into the Russian Empire. They tried that before and it worked out very badly for them. So I think we are in for a prolonged conflict, and I don't imagine that even after the military phase ends, if Putin is victorious, that we will see Ukraine become a peaceful unit of the Russian Empire. I don't think it will be. I think it will take a lot of effort from Russia to keep it suppressed.
So what really then do you expect to happen over the next week, from the European perspective, Mr. Bond? Do you expect Europe to go beyond sanctions at all? Can there be any attempt made by NATO to put any kind of pressure on Russia?
I mean, if you're talking about NATO as an organization, the Secretary General made very clear this morning that NATO is not going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, but it is going to reinforce the eastern parts of NATO. And I think that's extremely necessary, because I think one cannot predict exactly what is going to happen when and if Russian troops begin to approach those borders. But in terms of individual member states who have already been offering military support to Ukraine, I mean military equipment to Ukraine, I would expect that would carry on. I mean, Ukraine is a sovereign state. It's a member of the United Nations. It has the right under the United Nations Charter to individual and collective self-defense. And if Ukraine asks its allies and partners for assistance, then I would imagine that at least some Western countries will want to help it. And so they should. This is democracy on the line. This is democracy threatened by autocracy.
A final word, Dr. Hamilton. Democracy threatened by autocracy. What do you expect the US now to do? We are told that the G7 meeting has taken place. What can we expect from President Biden?
Well, I agree, democracy versus autocracy. I have to really object vehemently to comment made earlier that somehow this is about NATO enlargement. That's a pretext. That's not even on the table. NATO has no intention to bring in Ukraine in any realistic time frame. The principle of keeping NATO's door open is going to stay open. But there has never been a debate in any recent time about Ukraine joining NATO. So this is a camouflage. This is Putin diverting everyone's attention from the real issue, which was he cannot tolerate an independent Ukraine, because a successful, prosperous, democratic Ukraine would resonate heavily throughout Russia. And it would provide an alternative Slavic success to the regime he has built in Russia. That is, in his mind, a direct threat. It's not about NATO. Remember, the first time he invaded in 2014, it was because the European Union signed a trade agreement with Ukraine. And then he rolled in the troops. It had nothing to do with NATO then either. It was about a trade agreement. How can that be a threat to him? It's not about these things. It is about his unwillingness to tolerate an independent country. So we have to respond to this, and that's why it's bigger than Ukraine, because it's a pretext for operations that could happen elsewhere.
I think that's a warning.
So you should expect today from the president and from many Western leaders, and we hope from countries around the world, a severe package of sanctions that will pulverize the Russian economy and isolate Russia in very extreme ways from being able to interact with lots of other countries. I think China is in a bind now. It doesn't really want to support the idea that you can use separatist regions as a pretext for military intervention. Think about China's own challenges about separatism and the conflicts. It's not a clear-cut issue for China. I think China has to, straddle the line here and has been intentionally vague exactly where it stands.
As you said,
and that shows the dilemma for many countries about Russia's actions.
That's right. What Russia has done today could, as you said, become a pretext for other countries to move in to sovereign nations. And therefore, the real challenges between democracy and autocracy, between the kind of leadership that Vladimir Putin is a muscular, strong man wanting to revive some notion of the imperial Russia, using Ukraine, therefore, as a pretext to expand Russia's influence in the area. But I appreciate all of you joining us at this critical time where the situation remains fluid in Ukraine. Thanks very much for joining us, to all our guests. Those are images coming in from different parts of Russia. Remember, my colleague Gaurav Sawant will have more reports from the ground in Ukraine in a moment. Let's take a break. As we head into that, tomorrow we'll be back with elections. And elections on my plate on Friday night. That's coming up from Manipur this time. We'll take a break and then look at the situation of Indian students who are stuck in Ukraine. Back in a moment.